Bellamy Carter met Eliza Williams on a pleasant spring afternoon, introduced by a mutual friend at a picnic in Central Park. The sun was shining brightly, the freshly cut grass had a fresh scent, and Eliza, with her bright eyes and radiant smile, seemed like the promise of a new beginning for Bellamy. It seemed like life began to make sense, and Bellamy found love in the arms of Eliza, and a beautiful relationship began. At first, their life seemed happy, filled with laughter and shared dreams. "You make me feel whole, Bellamy," Eliza would whisper on quiet nights as they gazed at the stars from their Brooklyn apartment balcony. The love was so incredible that it resulted in a beautiful baby. However, with the birth of Bob, the atmosphere gradually changed. Eliza, once full of life and love, turned into a shadow of herself. She didn't engage, keeping her distance as if an invisible veil separated her from her husband and son. Days passed, months, and years, and the couple remained distant. Eliza growing further from her family. Bob, with his curious eyes and infectious laughter, was only 5 years old but already sensed his mother's absence. "Daddy, why does Mommy never come to my school performances?" he would ask, his little eyes filled with confusion and sadness. Bellamy, trying to protect his son, would respond with a forced smile, "Mommy has a lot of work, my champion, but she loves us very much. You know that." The family vacation so longed for by Bellamy never materialized. Eliza always had an excuse, an unavoidable commitment, an urgent work project. "It's not like I don't want to go, Bellamy. You know how life is," she would say, avoiding her husband's disappointed gaze. The relationship between mother and son became almost non-existent. Conversations were brief, hugs were scarce. Bob, realizing his mother's coldness, clung even tighter to Bellamy, who became his safe haven. "Daddy, you'll never leave me, will you?" Bob would ask, clinging to Bellamy's neck, and with teary eyes, Bellamy would respond, "Never, my little one. I will always be here for you." Every day was a challenge, but Bellamy stayed strong for Bob. He wondered what had changed, why the woman he loved had become so distant. But despite everything, he continued to fight, hoping that somehow the family he had dreamed of could become a reality once again. The atmosphere in the Carter household gradually became thicker and more turbulent. Eliza, who once filled the rooms with laughter and songs, now soured with her constant criticisms. Everything from the arrangement of the furniture to the way Bellamy made breakfast seemed to be under her harsh scrutiny. "Bellamy, why can't you arrange these books like Stephen does? His house is always spotless," Eliza said with a bitter tone as she disapprovingly eyed the bookshelf in the living room. Her crossed arms and penetrating gaze conveyed a dissatisfaction that went beyond mere disorder. Bellamy, on the other hand, struggled to remain calm, delving into the depths of his patience for words of reconciliation. "Eliza, I try to do my best. Maybe we can tidy up together," he suggested, reaching out in an attempt to bridge the gap. However, Eliza would deflect, avert her gaze, and mutter something about how the neighbor's grass always seemed greener. Bellamy, with a heavy heart, watched the growing distance between them, a chasm of misunderstandings and unspoken words. Comparisons with other men became frequent, causing Bellamy to feel diminished and undervalued. "Is it so hard to be like Mike? He always knows what to say and do," Eliza complained, rolling her eyes and sighing in frustration. Bellamy, battling his internal storm of doubts and insecurities, began to suspect possible infidelity. Eliza's late-night outings, constant messages on her phone, and hushed conversations fueled his fears. "Who is he, Eliza? What does he have that I don't?" he wondered silently, searching her belongings for evidence. However, no matter how hard he looked, Bellamy found nothing concrete, only fragments of a truth he feared to discover. Uncertainty gnawed at his heart, making each day a battle for the peace and unity of the family he still hoped to rebuild. The nights were long, and Bellamy lay beside Eliza, staring at the ceiling and wondering how they had come to this point. Eliza, asleep and distant, seemed like an enigma, and Bellamy, despite all the love and dedication, felt lost in a labyrinth of suspicions and disillusionment. And this situation remained unchanged for years. As the years passed, it seemed that the distance between the couple doubled each year. Bob grew increasingly close to his father and was becoming a young man, looking up to his father with great admiration, as his father had become his hero. Days went by, and the situation persisted. And in the stillness of one night, silence was suddenly interrupted by Bellamy's uncontrollable shivering. The room, once shrouded in darkness, was illuminated by the pale glow of the moon, revealing Bellamy's pale and sweaty face, his feverish body contrasting with the cold of the early morning, and each breath was a whisper of pain. Eliza, his voice was a hoarse murmur, the plea of a man in need of help. Eliza, please help me. Eliza, sitting on the edge of the bed, watched her husband with indifferent eyes. Bellamy, it's just a fever. You're a grown man, not a spoiled child. Her voice was cold, devoid of any sympathy. But Bellamy was nearly unconscious, the delirium of high fever distorting the reality around him. Hospital. I need to go to the hospital, he mumbled, his vacant eyes fixed on nothingness. Finally seeing the seriousness of her husband's condition, Eliza sighed resignedly. Fine, let's go then, she said. She helped him into the car and drove toward the nearest hospital. The journey was made in silence, interrupted only by the sound of rain hitting the windshield and Bellamy's moans. Midway, Eliza's cell phone rang. She answered, and a hushed conversation unfolded. The urgency in her voice contrasted with her earlier indifference. Yes, I understand. I can swing by in a little while, she said. Her eyes glanced at Bellamy, who was semi-conscious in the passenger seat. Suddenly, she stopped the car. Bellamy, I'm going to leave you here. There's an unexpected work matter. You can wait here. Without waiting for a response, she practically pushed Bellamy out of the car, leaving him alone in the rain just a few meters from the hospital, in a state of semi-consciousness. Bellamy, I'm going to leave you here, he cried out, but she was already gone, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Alone and desperate, Bellamy gathered the last bit of strength he had left and crawled towards the hospital. The rain soaked his body, each drop a reminder of Eliza's betrayal. The world around him spun, but the determination in his eyes burned brightly. He wouldn't give up, not without a fight. Heading toward the hospital, there was no one to help him, no phone to call for help, only the cold rain as his company, each drop feeling like needles on his feverish skin. With one last burst of strength, Bellamy reached the hospital doors, the warmth from inside enveloping his drenched body, his vision blurred, and darkness embraced him, consciousness slipping away like the last leaf of autumn. When Bellamy opened his eyes again, the world was bathed in white light and the soft sounds of heart monitors. He tried to move, but each limb felt like it weighed a ton. A relieved sigh caught his attention, and he turned his head to find Bob's concerned gaze. Dad, are you okay? Bob's voice was choked with emotion, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I was so worried. Bellamy tried to smile, the gesture an attempt to convey reassurance. I'm here, son, thanks to you. I'm here. That's when he noticed Eliza, her expression filled with guilt, which Bellamy couldn't help but notice. Eliza, Bellamy's voice was hoarse, filled with unspoken questions. Eliza lifted her eyes, meeting his. Bellamy, I don't know what to say, her voice trembled, and she averted her gaze again. Bellamy steadied the face of the woman he had once loved, seeking answers, trying to understand. He felt Bob's hand squeeze his own, the warmth of his son's touch bringing him back to reality. We'll get through this, Bellamy, said Bellamy, more to himself than to the others. We'll get through this, Bob. And as he spoke, Eliza continued to sit there, drenched and trembling, a solitary figure amidst the hospital's light. The atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension, the sound of monitors filled the space as Bellamy tried to absorb Bob's revelation. The young man with eyes burning with anger and disgust recounted how he had discovered the truth behind his father's absence. I woke up, and you weren't there, Dad. I knew something was wrong, Bob began, the words flowing like a torrent. I went to Mom and asked where you were. She tried to avoid it, said you were fine, but I could see it in her eyes. She was lying. Bellamy looked at Eliza, who averted her gaze, unable to confront the accusation in her son's eyes. He could see the internal struggle in her, remorse battling pride. "I pressed her, Dad. I pressed her until she finally admitted," Bob continued, the anger palpable in his voice. "She left you out there in the rain, alone and sick. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it." Bellamy felt a mix of sadness and pride for his son. Bob, so young, displayed a strength and determination that left Bellamy in awe. He squeezed his son's hand, a silent gesture of support. "I made her get in the car, made her drive here," Bob said, his chin lifted defiantly. "She didn't want to, but I wasn't going to leave you alone, Dad." Eliza finally lifted her gaze, facing her son. "Bob, enough," she interrupted, disappointment evident in her eyes. "Don't you see? Can't you see what you've done to us?" Bellamy felt the weight of the situation, the future of the family hanging by a thread. He knew his son's words were true, but the path ahead was uncertain. "Bob," Bellamy spoke softly, "I know what I must do, but it's a difficult decision." Bob looked at his father, determination in his eyes. "Dad, you deserve more. We deserve more. I advise you to divorce her, for us." The days passed, and Bellamy continued to stay in the hospital. And with each passing day, he thought about what his son had said. It weighed on his mind, the weight of divorce and the life he would lead with his son. Bellamy sat on the edge of the hospital bed, his eyes fixed on the window as the world outside went about its business, unaware of the turmoil in his mind. The idea of divorce, which had once seemed like a distant whisper, now echoed like a deafening roar. The weight of the decision rested on his shoulders, every facet of the choice cutting like glass. Financial concerns formed an intricate maze in his mind. How could he support Bob on his own? Bill's education, his son's future, it all seemed like an insurmountable mountain. Bellamy ran his hands through his hair, feeling fatigue seep into every fiber of his being. Bob deserves stability, he deserves a bright future, Bellamy murmured to himself, the words a mantra of parental responsibility. But how can I provide that for him alone? The door to the room opened, and Bob entered, his perceptive gaze immediately sensing the storm within his father. "Dad," Bob said, approaching and holding Bellamy's hand, "I know it's hard, but we'll get through this together." Bellamy looked at his son, seeing the determination and strength that transcended his youth. "It's so much, Bob. The house, school, our livelihood, and I can't help but wonder, why did Eliza do this? What was going through her mind?" Bob squeezed his father's hand, his eyes reflecting an early wisdom. "Dad, sometimes people make decisions we can't understand, but we can't dwell on that. We have to think about us, our future." Bellamy sighed, feeling the truth in his son's words. It was a challenging path, but Bob was right. They had to move forward together. "It might be a challenge, Bob, but you're right," Bellamy admitted, a wistful smile playing on his lips. "We'll face this together." And so, with uncertainty still hanging in the air, father and son came together, ready to confront the uncertain future but determined to build something new from the wreckage of the past. Bellamy felt encouraged to separate from Eliza. As he contemplated the consequences of divorce and the uncertain future, his phone vibrated abruptly on the bedside table in the hospital. The number was unknown, but something within him urged him to answer. Bellamy, the voice on the other end, was hesitant, almost guilty. "Yes, who is this?" Bellamy asked. "It's Michael, Eliza's colleague." A shiver ran down Bellamy's spine. "Michael? Why would he be calling?" A heavy silence settled in, interrupted by Michael's abrupt confession. "Bellamy, I don't know how to say this. Eliza and we're having an affair." Bellamy's world seemed to spin. Michael's words confirmed the suspicions that had been gnawing at his thoughts, betrayal. The reality of the situation was revealed like an open wound, an affair. "An affair?" Bellamy repeated, his voice hoarse, struggling against a wave of emotions. "For how long?" Michael sighed, remorse evident in his voice. "Several months." I'm so sorry, Bellamy. I didn't know what I was doing. Eliza always said you two were separating. Bellamy gripped the phone tightly, trying to assimilate the revelation. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, but the image revealed was one of desolation. You knew? Bellamy accused, anger boiling in his veins. You knew, and yet you continued. Michael swallowed hard. I was blind, Bellamy, and now I just want you to know the truth. I urge you to distance yourself from Eliza, for your sake, for Bob's. Bellamy stared at the hospital's white wall, the outside world blurring as the truth settled in. Eliza had betrayed him, and now, more than ever, he had to make a decision. Thank you for telling me, Michael, Bellamy finally said, his voice firm. Now, I will do what's best for me and my son. Ending the call, Bellamy felt a mixture of pain and determination. He knew what he had to do, no matter how difficult it was. The truth, however painful, was the first step toward freedom. The weeks following Eliza's infidelity revelation were a whirlwind of tension and anguish. The atmosphere within the house became unbearable. Bellamy and Eliza, once united by love and joy, barely exchanged glances now, and when they did, the pain and resentment flowing between them were evident. Bob, on the other hand, grew increasingly distant from his mother. Dinners were filled with awkward silences, punctuated only by the sounds of cutlery and dishes. Eliza, sensing the growing hostility, tried to reach out to her son, but with each attempt, Bob withdrew even further. Why did you do this, Mom? Bob asked one night, his blue eyes searching for answers in Eliza. Eliza lowered her gaze, words caught in her throat. Bob, I made mistakes. I didn't want to hurt you or your father, but you did, Bob interrupted, his voice firm. And now we're all suffering. Bellamy, watching the scene, felt a mixture of pity and anger. Eliza had erred, but seeing his son suffer amplified the pain in his own heart. The idea of divorce was like a persistent shadow, but the practical reality of the situation's financial issues, custody of Bob, were obstacles that seemed insurmountable. At night, Bellamy often found himself awake, pondering the consequences of a separation. How can I leave Bob without a mother? How can I ensure that he grows up happy and secure? He wondered, as the shadows danced on the walls of his room. Eliza, on the other hand, was aware of the inevitability of divorce. She approached Bellamy one night, her face marked by anguish. Bellamy, I know I messed up. I hurt you and Bob, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But, can we try, for Bob's sake, to find a way forward? Bellamy looked into Eliza's eyes, searching for traces of the woman he had fallen in love with. Eliza, things have changed. We need to think about what's best for Bob now, and I need to think about what's best for me, too. The days went by, and the tension in the house reached its peak. Divorce, once a shadow, was now a palpable presence, and Bellamy knew that the decision, however difficult, was inevitable. And with that certainty in mind, he began to tread the painful but necessary path to a new beginning. In the days that followed, Bellamy spent hours in solitary contemplation, the weight of betrayal and helplessness weighing on his heart. Sitting on the porch, he watched the sunset, the shades of orange and red painting the sky, while his mind was engulfed in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Eliza's betrayal had left a deep wound, but Bob's resilience and determination served as a beacon of hope and strength. Bob, recognizing his father's inner struggle, approached him one afternoon, his hand reassuringly touching Bellamy's shoulder. Dad, I know it hurts, but we can overcome this together. You're my hero, and we can build a better life, just the two of us, Bob said. Bellamy looked into his son's sincere eyes, feeling a wave of love and gratitude. Bob, you're the reason I keep fighting. Let's face this together. And so, with Bob's support, Bellamy began to envision a different future, one where the pain of betrayal and Eliza's callousness would be but a distant memory. He started seeking out lawyers and educating himself about the divorce process, determined to give himself and his son a fresh start. Finally, the day came when Bellamy, with a mixture of determination and sadness, sat down in front of Eliza to propose divorce. "Eliza," he began, his voice steady, "what happened between us can't be fixed. I am determined to divorce you and give Bob and me a chance to start over." Eliza, her eyes lowered, nodded. "Bellamy, I knew this day would come. I'm sorry for everything, but maybe it is for the best for all of us." The air was heavy with unspoken emotions and silent farewells. Bellamy, though hurt, felt hopeful. With Bob by his side, he knew he could weather any storm and build a life filled with love and understanding, far away from the shadows of the past. As days passed after the tumultuous separation, Bellamy and Bob embarked on a new journey together, determined to rebuild their lives far from the storm that had been their past. They found a cozy house in a peaceful neighborhood, a refuge where father and son could heal their wounds and strengthen the already unbreakable bonds that bound them. Each unpacked box, each picture hung on the wall, was a step towards a new life. Bellamy did his utmost to provide comfort and security for Bob, ensuring that his son's education and well-being were a top priority. "Bob, this is our fresh start. Let's make it a home filled with love and happiness," Bellamy promised as they organized the new space together. Bob, his eyes filled with hope, responded with a smile. "I know, Dad. With you, I know I'll always be safe and happy." Meanwhile, Eliza, entangled in her own dilemmas, was grappling with the consequences of her choices, trying to make sense of the web she had woven for herself. In the days that followed, Bellamy watched with growing joy as signs of Bob's happiness emerged. The boys' laughter filled the house, weekends were filled with trips to the park, and family game nights. Bellamy realized that the worries that had once clouded his heart were beginning to dissipate, replaced by moments of joy and companionship. "Are you happy, my son?" Bellamy would often ask, receiving sincere smiles and tight hugs from Bob as the answer. "Dad, I've never been happier. I'm with you, and that's all that matters to me," Bob affirmed, reinforcing Bellamy's certainty that they were on the right path. The tranquility that father and son were building together was like a balm for the wounds of the past. Bellamy, watching Bob play in the yard under the blue sky, felt a profound peace. Worries had been replaced by gratitude and love, and he knew that together they could face any challenge life had in store for them. Thank you for joining us today on Deep Stories. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video.